This week, I got the chance to sit down and play an early build of Warhammer 40k Darktide for an entire day. And I mean that literally. My friends and I booted up the game in the early afternoon, and besides like a 10-minute food break, we played non-stop until the middle of the night. If that doesn't make it obvious, let me clarify. For one, I'm 37 years old, so this doesn't happen very often at this stage of my life. But also, it is because I came away not only very impressed, but pretty sure that this may end up one of my favorite Warhammer games of all time. And that's saying a lot because for all of the misses, there have been quite a few hits in this franchise, games that I've really enjoyed, like Space Marine, Vermintide, Dawn of War, and Warhammer Online, to name a few. Now, I do have some early concerns for Darktide based on my time with it and what we played, but by and large, every important aspect from the gameplay, the moment-to-moment action, the performance, and the setting, and boy, have they crafted like one incredible setting. All of that core, vital stuff for a game, the developer looks to have knocked out of the park. Let me tell you, this is going to be a good one. I'm sure of it. So Darktide is a first-person action game built off the back of Fat Shark's success with the Vermintide series. It basically takes the best elements of those games, makes some notable changes, and brings it into the dark and gritty world of 40k. I couldn't tell you at this point how the game will stack up when it comes to like the long-term replayability. That's something we just won't know for sure until after release. But in terms of the initial package, like sitting down and spending time with the game, this has got to be their best take on first-person hacking, slashing, and shooting your way through hordes of enemies with your friends that they have ever made. All right, so I'm going to take you through kind of the core of the game, what the game is, what there is to do, and then talk a bit about kind of the pros and cons about what I'm thinking so far. So this game actually starts with you making a character, a notable departure from Vermintide, where you just picked from an existing roster of distinct named heroes. Well, in Darktide, you are making your own version of the game's 4 classes, choosing between the Ogryn, Veteran, Psyker, and Zealot, and then customizing from there. As you probably expect, each class not only has like a different visual appearance and aesthetic, but it also brings something unique to the table, and aside from their own skills, the big thing is their unique auras, which provide special area of effect buffs to any nearby party members. To such a degree as well that although you can have multiple of the same class in any party, it does seem like it is probably going to be almost necessary on harder difficulties to have one of each class just because of the unique buffs that they offer. So for example, in my playthrough, I went with the Zealot, whose playstyle focuses on being up close and personal, in the thick of melee combat, controlling enemies, and also bolstering defenses. My particular class's aura increases the toughness of my teammates, which is basically acts like a shield, a second health bar. The Zealot is the only class that has this particular aura, and the other classes each have their own unique aura that will do something to basically bolster either the defenses or the damage of the team. Okay, so after you pick your class, then it's into the customization. You actually do some like RP stuff. You pick your background, such as your home world, your childhood, what it was like growing up, and a defining moment. Then also your appearance, which was surprisingly robust. Way more options than I expected for things like body, various facial features, hair, and height. You also select from one of 3 personalities, and this will affect how your character responds to other party members as well as any in-game events. Things like the banter and the dialogue between characters will be affected by this choice. And then finally, you select a prison sentence, which changes the clothes that you wear, and again, more RP stuff. You wrap up with picking your name, and then you are going straight into the tutorial. Now, this just takes you through the basics of combat and movement. It's all pretty standard stuff, but they also had an advanced tutorial which introduced some more technical things about the game. It basically teaches you how to get good. So this one taught us that using heavy attacks on armored enemies will break their defenses. The fact that you can follow up a push with a special counterattack. It taught you about corruption, which is caused by certain types of attacks and items and even being downed. This will reduce your max health, and the only way to repair it is at these med stations where this creepy cyborg creature will stab you in the face. Apparently that is healing. I don't know. It also teaches you about tagging enemies, placing markers, performing slides, which are are super important, not just because they look cool, but also because it's actually used to dodge ranged attacks. And this is big because in this game, ranged attacks stagger you, they slow you up. Now, during our preview of this game that we had back in June, we were told by the developer that there would also be a prologue, which basically has you playing through the events that lead up to getting captured and imprisoned. However, as of this particular build, it was not here. I don't know if that's because it isn't finished yet or because they don't want to spoil the story stuff. I don't really care about that, but obviously that is the developer's decision if they want to save the introduction for the full launch. Either way, on release there should be a prologue. There wasn't in this build, so you'll do tutorial probably and then prologue, and then on to the next thing, which is getting tossed into the Morningstar. So this is a spaceship. It acts basically as like a shared space and social hub. Here you will see other players walking around, but more importantly, this is where you interact with the game's various things like the missions and talking to NPCs. In this build, we had access to the mission terminal, a weapons vendor, a contract vendor, which also sold rare weapons that we unlocked after reaching level 11. And then on top of that, which wasn't in this build, but we do know is supposed to be there at launch, will include a crafting vendor, a credit store, a barber shop, and in-game mailbox. Now, none of those, again, were in this particular build, so the Morningstar, for that reason, felt kind of empty, and there were obviously spots where I was like, there should be something here, but there isn't. They are going to be there at some point in the future. To me, though, the biggest omission in this build was the lack of a crafting vendor. Crafting is supposed to play a pretty big role in this game and in the gear progression, but the vendor and the whole crafting system was simply not present, which was a real shame. Also, I am real curious as to what exactly is going to be in that credit store. What are they going to be selling? This is like a medium priced game. It's going to be selling for $40, but still really curious about what the credit store specifically entails. But let's get into actually playing the game. Let's talk about that. So the general structure of Darktide is pretty straightforward. You pick a mission, you play the mission, you collect a reward, and then you do it all again. Now, the first step in this is to walk up to the mission terminal. This is located in the center of the Morningstar, and here will be displayed a rotating stock of available missions, difficulties, and objectives. So I believe when the game launches, for some reason I have the number 12 in my head. I swear I read that somewhere, but there will be some number of total missions, which are essentially levels with distinct objectives, and then all of these modifiers apply to them, be it the difficulty or secondary objectives or things that make things more difficult, like increasing the number of enemies or providing them with like distinct attributes, stuff like that. So the missions that you see at this terminal will be cycling in and out on individual timers, basically giving you a new set of options every time you visit. Now, from what I saw, every single mission level always had the same primary objective, whether that was to take out a target or complete some sort of specific task. But the main thing that you're doing on any mission seems to always be the same. It's the difficulty, the side objectives, and again, any modifiers, as well as the mix and combination of enemies that you encounter as you play through. That is what is constantly changing. But you pick from the various options that are on the terminal. The first mission that we selected when we started was this smelter complex. After a brief queue, we match made and actually found a third teammate and then launched with them and one AI bot. Now, keep in mind here, this was a fairly early limited access build. It was kind of meant as just a preview for the upcoming closed beta, which is actually why that text is in the upper left-hand corner there, even though we were playing before those displayed dates, which was kind of a weird thing. Anyway, I was surprised to even find one other person because I knew this was a very limited test, but we found someone, we had an AI bot, and then off we went. Loading in, you actually are on a transport ship and you're getting briefed on the mission by this floating head. I should say the whole premise of this game is like you guys are all basically prisoners and you're trying to work off your debt, like gain respect with the faction, and this is leveling you up and unlocking new things. But yeah, you're prisoners doing missions as you serve out your sentence. That's the whole idea. So we're getting briefed on what our objective is here. Just some nice little story and RP to set the stage. And then we are dropped off and it is time to play. Now, pretty much immediately, I was blown away by this game's atmosphere, and that continued to be the case as I played more and more. They have just built such this really engaging, immersive, but also oppressive and super gritty world, which is exactly what the 40K universe is supposed to be all about. But I feel that doesn't always translate into their games. You don't always get that kind of depressive feeling while playing these games, but this one really does it in a good way, though. I do mean that in a good way. Like, you feel like you are just inside of this really rough place, likely not too pleasant for any of its inhabitants, but an entertaining location and setting to be a tourist in, which is what we are, and I just loved it. It is so dire. It is oozing with how terrible it is. They nailed the atmosphere. It's really great stuff. And the other thing that they absolutely nailed in this game is the gameplay. So let's talk about that. The structure of each level is pretty straightforward. Like I said, the missions, the levels themselves will always have the same objective, and it's always the same level. There's no procedural stuff here in terms of the layout, where you start and where you end, and the things you're doing are always the same. You will have your one primary objective with a few tasks to complete on the way there. So in this particular level, the smelter complex, we had to first enter the building and then find an elevator and then proceed to the smelter, start it up, and then purge this demonic infestation, these kind of tendrily things with eyeballs that we had to destroy while fending off the hordes of enemies. And there are a few mini tasks here and there to complete in the process, like maybe we have to defend a location while we wait for the elevator, or activate these terminals, or load these canisters, carrying them from one place to another, take out particular enemies, things like that. The levels, they're always the same. Where you start, the path you move through, although there is some variance because there are sections of the levels that are actually quite large and expansive. You know, it is a linear game, but it is linear and wide, I guess I would call it. That's probably the best way to describe it. And besides any tasks, any objectives that you're doing, most of the time you are constantly engaged in combat, fighting off hordes and hordes of enemies, and all of that feels super good. Literally everything about the gameplay in Darktide is top notch. It is so good. The melee, the gunplay, the associated sounds and animations which go into that, plus like responsiveness, all of that goes into what makes a game feel good to play, and they've nailed it. It's all very good. I am super impressed. Like, I have always liked the combat in Fat Shark's games, in the Vermintide series particularly, but now it feels like they are like delivering like AAA quality gameplay, which is a huge accomplishment for a $40 price game, I would say. And I wasn't expecting that, because yeah, their games have always been fun, but they were always a little rough around the edges. It seems like they have really just fine-tuned things and gotten it on point. Yes, the gameplay is definitely where this game excels. If there is nothing else about Darktide, it is that it plays really good. Going in with your melee weapons and just chopping through hordes and hordes of enemies, switching to your range to pop out some high value targets that are charging at you or that are off in the distance, maneuvering around, pushing enemies, staggering them, doing these combo attacks, using your skills as well, because every single class has their own skill. For my particular class, I have this ability that lets me charge straight forward, replenishes my shield, and gives me a guaranteed crit on my next strike. And every single class has their own unique mechanics, active and passive abilities. All of this in concert together just feels really good. I don't know if I've said it yet, but the gameplay feels good. Congratulations, Darktide. You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. It's great stuff. So yes, you're in the level, you're moving through, you're doing objectives, and you're fighting all of these enemies. Now, the enemy variety is actually pretty large. You've got the basic kind of shambling zombie-like enemies. These will usually be found in groups. There can even occasionally be these events where hordes of them will come in. You've also got the gunners, which are sort of one step above the basic enemies. They're like them, except they also have a ranged weapon. And then there are a lot more specialized enemies. These include snipers. There are these armored, two-handed axe-wielding knights, which are very difficult to take down and are also deadly if they get too close to you. Characters with flamethrowers, with a Gatling gun, ones that will toss these grenades, these fire grenades that cover a huge area on the ground and deal a ton of damage. These are super deadly. There are also ones that will charge at you and explode. There's a variety of these big, tough Ogren characters, like one that's just melee, one with a big old shield that you basically can't damage from the front. There is one that will charge at you from across the map. It is hilarious. He'll just go full speed, shoulder down, running towards one of your teammates, and if he happens to catch them, he grabs them and just starts slamming them on the ground repeatedly. It's just a crazy. There are also trappers. They will shoot these electrifying nets that have to be manually removed from a teammate that gets caught. There are dogs, which are kind of similar. They will pounce on one of your teammates and they have to be dispatched of to get rid of. And then there's also the mini boss. Now, the only one that we saw, and keep in mind, this this test only had 4 of the available missions, and again, I believe there are 12 total or somewhere around there. I hope I'm not making up that number, but this test only had 4, and in those 4 missions, for the 10 hours that we played, we only ever saw one of the mini bosses. And what I mean by these is the one that we came across was a Plague Ogren, and he would just show up occasionally in the level. Now, it doesn't seem like there are specific areas in levels where the Plague Ogren, for example, can show up, but it doesn't always happen is the idea. And I call him a mini boss because he is very challenging, he is massive, and he has his own specific health bar that shows up on the top of the screen, just like a regular boss does. Now, one thing that I am disappointed by, I was gonna save this for the end, but I'll just talk about it now, is that he was the only mini boss that we saw the whole time, and I assumed that there were going to be more than these. Now, again, there's a huge variety. I listed, I don't know, was that like 12 or something, and there's a lot of different enemy types in the mix, but the Plague Ogren is the only one that is like a mini boss, and I feel like that's something that they could improve upon, but I am unaware of what their plans are when it comes to that type of mini boss encounter. Okay, and one thing I should note as well is that every one of these enemies have their own distinct sounds. Now, I'm not just talking about sounds like how they walk and move and the sounds of their weapons, but usually they will have some sort of a call out that you will hear as they approach. So for example, before any dogs come, you will hear them bang, them howling off in the distance. Or if there are any of the characters that have the flamethrowers, they actually make a clicking sound as they are igniting their weapon. It's really cool. And there is some special sound effect for any one of these like unique enemies. Heck, even the basic enemies, those like zombie-like creatures, when there are hordes coming in, you will hear a huge group of them just like screaming in the distance. And then also some music kicks up as they start swarming in. So that's another thing that this game I think does really well. The sound design is great. There's a lot going on all the time as you have all of these different types of enemies, but between actually seeing them, even just properly listening and playing enough so that you know what those sounds are tied to, what they correlate to, it just creates a super immersive experience, and you feel very aware. The more I played, the more just on top of it that I felt, because I was making those associations and realizing every time the howling happens, the stupid dogs show up and tackle one of my teammates, and that was a very satisfying process to go through that and learn those things and then use that knowledge to your advantage. It's really, really cool. Now, beyond that, there are also straight up boss fights in the game. This is one of those things that will be tied to a particular level. Of the 4 missions we played, there was only one of them where we saw an actual full-on boss at the end. He just ran around, he had a ranged and a melee weapon as well as this overshield, and they would also summon in some hordes of more basic enemies. So basically we just had to work down the shield and then damage his health, and then he would go through phases replenishing the shield, calling in more enemies. It was actually a pretty fun fight, not particularly complex and not really, I wouldn't call it like a phased fight as well. Felt pretty similar all the way through, but it was still, it was engaging, it was interesting. So that's like the basic structure of the game, and just to clarify here, you play through that level, you fight the enemies, you do whatever your objectives are, and then once you're finished, you get your rewards at the end. So you will get a set amount of experience for completing the main mission. You actually know what that is going to be before you even start, and then you will get a little bit of bonus experience for doing any side objectives. There are also the currencies. There is Ordo, which is kind of like the gold equivalent. This is your standard baseline currency, but then there's also plasteel and diamantine. You will find these while playing the game. They'll be like things that you can pick up on the ground. Also, at the end of a mission with your experience gain, sometimes you will level up. Anytime you do level up, you are awarded a new weapon. And then on top of that, there's this thing called Emperor's Gift. Now, we would get these occasionally. They didn't happen every time. I'm not exactly sure what triggers whether you receive an Emperor's Gift or not, but basically it is another weapon reward that you can get at the end of a mission. So you complete the mission and then you will load back into the Morningstar. I would always check the weapons vendor to see if there were any new upgrades, which a lot of times there actually were. The stock for that vendor was constantly refreshing, and every time it refreshed, it also seemed to correlate with our progress. Like as we played more and as we continued to level up, the weapons got better. There was also a larger variety of weapons. At first, I was only ever getting this axe as well as a submachine gun, or I think it was an auto pistol. But as we played more, I had access to new and different weapons, but also also weapons of higher rarity that would show up in the weaponsmith's rotating stock. And then after checking that, I would queue up for the next mission. And that is basically the process that we would go through. Pick a mission, go through the mission, do the stuff, collect the rewards, check the vendors, queue for another mission, so on and so on. We keep doing this, we keep trying new things, trying different difficulties, replaying the same levels with different side objectives, continuing, and leveling up in the process. To the point where eventually it was after 9 or so hours, we hit level 11, and that is actually when we unlocked the contract vendor. He basically has these specific quests that you will have, and these will ask you to do things like kill certain enemies or complete missions with doing the side objectives or collecting grimoires or whatever. They're just side quests, and they reward a special unique currency that is only used at the contract vendor, and he, with that currency, will sell you high rarity items. Specifically, purple and orange gear is what we saw from this particular vendor. Speaking of progression, let's talk a little bit about that. So when you pick a class, you've got your base class, a special ability, and then you've got a few different passives as well as that active ability. But then also there's a whole system of traits. There are multiple rows of traits. They're in rows of 3, and you unlock these as you level up, as you keep playing. Upon reaching level 5, we unlocked our first tier of those traits, or actually I think they're called talents, and they allowed us to pick 1 from 3 available in that first row. So for me, I had the choice between getting 100% more toughness when eliminating enemies, making it so that critical hits reduce any toughness damage I take by 33% for 3 seconds, or giving me a constant 7% refreshing per second to my toughness, which actually that is the one that I happen to choose. And as you keep going, you keep unlocking more. I think the second unlock row was at level 10, so presumably it's going to go 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way up to, I think somewhere around 30 is where they said they were shooting for the max level for characters. And those are pretty much everything. Those are pretty much the basics. I mean, there's a lot more specifics that I could talk about of like particular levels, but I think you get the general idea. That is the gist of what this game is, how it plays, and more or less the overall structure of it. Now I want to just briefly touch on some of my likes and dislikes from what I've played so far. Now, as you heard me gushing over earlier, the gameplay I think is phenomenal. This is got to be like the main selling point of this game right now. I am super impressed. It feels so good to play, and it is the reason why we play nonstop from mid-afternoon till midnight, because it just feels so good. Like you constantly want to jump back in, keep playing, especially getting new weapons, which will have different attack animations and different perks, different special attacks, and all of this stuff made me want to keep on going, made me want to keep on doing match after match after match. It is all very good. I love it, and I'm sad that the game is down right now because I can't wait to play again. The gameplay is a huge plus for me. And to go along with this, I just gotta say, in general, I thought the overall animations in the game were really good. This ties directly into gameplay feeling good. There was a lot of really cool, interesting flourishes as well. As I was moving with my axe, I would carry it kind of low on the handle in general. Anytime I started sprinting, my character would let go and grab it quickly higher up by the axe head part. And it's a small little thing, but it happens every time you start sprinting. And there's something very satisfying about it. Going from being low on the handle, and then when you sprint, letting go and picking up right by the head so that you lower the center of, I mean, that's what you would do, right? You wouldn't carry an axe while running low on the handle like you might want for swinging. You would grab it up high because you want to lower the center of gravity. That makes it easier to run with. This is a strange thing to nerd out about, but even just that little shuffle, that little let go and grab up top, I noticed it. It was really cool, and it added to the feel of sprinting, if that makes any sense. I really liked it. Across the board, there were a lot of great animations. When weapon swapping, bolting back in the chamber or whatever for my auto pistol, there are lots of little things that I noticed here and there that were just very well done. Great attention to detail. And speaking of attention to detail, holy crap, was the immersion and the setting, the set pieces in this game phenomenal. Spending time in this world just felt amazing. Very atmospheric. One of the most atmospheric Warhammer games I've played. I mean, it feels like you're there. It feels like you're in the game. It feels like Batman. It really does. It's great. Even just the Morningstar, the ship that you're in, walking around, checking out all the little nooks and crannies, all this like gothic metal feel with this oppressive overtone. It's good stuff. And also really good are both the music. This slaps. You have, I don't know if I'm going to include any of it so we don't get copyright struck here, but if you get a chance to get into a beta or something before release just to listen to the music, or maybe the OST ends up on YouTube somewhere, the music in this game, phenomenal, really great stuff. And then also the banter I was very impressed by. I literally laughed out loud numerous times in our playthrough. Some of the stuff that these characters say to each other was just so ridiculously hilarious, and it also ties into the atmosphere with how like oppressive and downtrodden everything feels. These characters feel the same way. Like they are just constantly giving each other crap, and it was really funny. I really enjoyed it. Like I said at the top though, it's not all roses, and I do have some real concerns after spending 10 hours with the game. One of the biggest things that we noticed is it really feels like there is a lack of incentive to do anything but the bare minimum. There appeared to be no bonus reward or anything to incentivize killing enemies or exploration. Basically, it seems like if you just really want to focus on completing the objective, whatever that is, going to a switch, doing this little mini puzzle, hacking a terminal, moving an object, like it feels like a lot of times it actually makes more sense to just run by all of the enemies. Now, there could be an underlying system that wasn't present in the end of mission information. Basically, if there could be rewards that aren't just tied to the experience and the currency gain, but based on the end of mission display, it seems like you are not rewarded for doing anything beyond the bare minimum. And I really wish that wasn't the case. And kind of going into that, when talking about the levels and everything, I do wish there was a bit more interactivity within the game space. As you're playing through a level, beyond whatever you need to do to complete any of your tasks, any of your objectives, the only thing you really ever interact with is like opening up crates. These can have inside of them things like ammo and grenades, and then also going to a meta station. And that's like it. Sometimes there's a door to open up, which will have a crate within it, but there isn't really any interactivity with the game space. I know this is seems like a strange thing to complain about because you're like, oh, there's nothing to interact with besides the stuff to interact with, but I guess I wish there was just maybe more dynamic or non-mission critical things to interact with, things that could change up and count. So here's just an example. Maybe if like in one of these areas there was a switch where you could swing a pendulum that could knock out a group of enemies. There's explosive barrels, okay? So you can shoot the explosive barrels, and that is a part of the level besides the NPCs, besides the enemies, that you can interact with that does something to the space, that does something to add variety or even just a funny moment to the gameplay. There's really none of that in this game, and I wish there was. I feel like that extra layer would really add a lot to the replayability, because yes, you are constantly going through the same paths pretty much. You're going spot A to spot B and doing the tasks in between. There is variance because you never know what enemies are going to show up, what combination of enemies, whether or not you're going to get the mini boss, the Plague Ogre. There is variety in there, absolutely, but I feel like one more layer would really add, it would be like multiplicative. It would add so much more to the game if they had that just like one extra layer. From this build, it is just an early build. Who knows how this is going to relate to release, but I did feel progression was a little slow. It took 3 hours for us to reach level 5 and get that first trait, 9 hours to reach level 10 and get the second trait, and then a little while longer to reach level 11 and unlocked contracts. So within the span of 10 hours or so, we got 2 rows of traits and then unlocked 1 vendor. And that feels really slow. Like, I feel like the rewards could be paced out a little bit better. Maybe though, of course, because we know that there will be more vendors, about twice the number of vendors in the Morningstar at full release, maybe there were some gaps in there that would be filled in. As I talked about earlier, I do hope and pray that there are more mini bosses besides the Plague Ogre. I feel like that's something else that could add a lot of variety. And then there was also some things with the preview build that certainly I hope get ironed out before launch. My friend noticed that his skins weren't working whenever he selected them because there are cosmetic skins. And also, there was a fair amount of crashing. The game played well. While playing, I felt like frame rate and performance were great, but both myself and another one of our friends both had a fair number of crashes while playing, and obviously that is not great, and I hope that gets fixed. And then finally, in the dislikes is pretty light on options, stuff that you would expect. For example, there was no option to adjust mouse sensitivity. There was something for controller, but there wasn't one for mouse sensitivity, and I couldn't find a FOV option, which was baffling. I have to assume that both of those will be in launch, but I would feel wrong not mentioning that they weren't here in what we played. My overall thoughts, I think it's pretty obvious. I think it's coming through in just the video recording. I really like this game. I think So much about it is great. It's fun to play, and I can't wait to play more of it. I hope they address some of those things, specifically the lack of incentive to do things beyond your primary objective. Why am I not getting experience for killing a bunch of enemies? Like, why are there some rewards for that? That would add a lot, because it would make it so that I don't want to just sprint to the objective and complete the mission as fast as possible and collect my set specific static amount of experience. I think giving additional rewards for doing more, for exploring, for engaging with more enemies, that is the biggest thing that I hope might see changes before release. But overall, I think this game is really good. I cannot wait to play. I am super excited. And yeah, the launch cannot come fast enough. If they need some more time to iron stuff like this out and another delay is in the cards, so be it. But regardless, whenever it launches, I will be playing this. Darktide is really, really good. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.